Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam Kozlowski.
I'm Billy Fitzsimons.
Sometimes on this podcast we tackle the big economic stories that shake the nation. But today we're going to look at something that's hitting closer to home, and that's your morning matcha order. If you've noticed your matcha latte costing significantly more than it used to, brace yourself. Global retailers say Japanese matcha prices have jumped between 30 and 75% in 2025 alone, and it's not slowing down. On today's podcast, we're going to explain why this is happening and whether the great matcha price hike is going to continue.
Sam, before we get into it, I first want to know, are you a big matcha drinker?
I have had a couple of sips ever, and that's it. I am too much of a diehard coffee drinker to even consider switching allegiances.
You are one of the biggest die-hard coffee drinkers I have ever met. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's actually why our logo is a coffee cup.
Exactly. And I'm going through at least 4 coffees a day at the moment. And that's me halving my coffee intake from its peak. So I'm way too consumed with coffee to think about matcha. But I've seen more and more of it almost every month around me here in Australia and around the world. I was in the US a couple of months ago and it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's absolutely massive. And it feels like something, I think over the past 4 years, it has really just exploded. But for anyone who's not super familiar with it, do you want to tell us what exactly is matcha?
So matcha is finely powdered green tea from Japan, or a variation of green tea. Now, the key difference from regular tea is that you consume the entire leaf in powder form. So matcha leaves get crushed up, put in powder form. You put that powder into hot water and drink it. That's different, obviously, from putting a tea bag into hot water where you're not actually consuming the tea leaves themselves. You throw the tea bag away. And that's what gives matcha its vibrant green color, but also how it packs so much caffeine, much more than an average cup of tea. If you take 1 milligram of matcha and 1 milligram of coffee, there's actually more caffeine in matcha than coffee. But because you need more coffee beans to make a shot of coffee, coffee still takes out the award for the most caffeine in a cup that we would buy from a cafe. But yes, it's this specific version of tea almost that you'll recognize on the street for its green striking color.
I feel like, again, like I said, it's really exploded in popularity.
Yeah.
Maybe it used to be more of a niche product than it is now. How big is this industry now?
So let's take it back to 2023. The global matcha market was worth 4.3 billion US dollars. That is a serious beverage market. It's projected to hit 7.4 billion US dollars by 2030. So we are in the middle of the matcha explosion here. Australian cafes were charging in 2023 $5 or $6 for a cup. That's now $7 or $8. US retail sales have surged 86% in just 3 years. And for Japan, it's really big business now. So Japan's exports of matcha were worth 1.85 billion in 2024. That went up 20% from just the previous year. Now, more than half of Japan's matcha goes to the US. So the US are the biggest consumers of matcha. Australia, I think, comes in at about 5th. So it's a huge export market, massive demand. But there's some problems in Japan that I'm excited to talk about, which is why we're seeing prices going up.
And so there's clearly now this massive demand. Are they now just growing more matcha because of how much demand there is?
Yeah, like if we go back to our fundamentals of economics, if people want more of something, you should just make more of it and then you export it and get heaps of money.
Yes.
But with matcha, it's not that simple. So you can't just plant more and solve the problem straight away. And I've gone deep. I boiled myself a nice cup of coffee and I went deep on why this problem is emerging. And there's 3 core issues here.
3 core issues as to why you can't just grow more matcha.
Exactly.
Got it.
So the first is time. So new matcha tea plantations require 5 years to reach the point where the leaves are ready to harvest and then sell. So for matcha companies, this translates to this investment they need to make now that they have to then wait 5 years to get a return on. That's a really long time to wait. They might not have the ability to actually sustain a business for 5 years before materializing that crop. And the second problem is labor, though, and the production process is incredibly intensive. Farmers must place the tea plants in shade for 3 to 4 weeks before harvest to bring out the flavour. So even before you harvest them, you have to move them around. After harvesting, the leaves are steamed, dried and deveined. And here's the kicker. After all of that process, only 50% of the original leaf weight becomes usable matcha powder. So
why?
Because of the process of going through that steam, and think about steaming broccoli, for example, it shrinks and it comes.
You know what does that? Kale.
Right. Well,
Kale,
there you go.
you literally, you start with a bunch and you end up with a spoonful.
Right. So you're doing all of this work and you're losing half the product. And that brings us to a broader issue. And that is that matcha farming is a craft and it's steeped in tradition and history. But with a greater portion of young adults in Japan moving away from these agricultural regions and towards the big metropolitan centres, there are actually fewer people carrying on the trade. So the average matcha grower in Japan is now over 70. And that's leading to this labour shortage as well. It's a tough job to begin with. It doesn't make as much matcha as you would hope, but actually the number of people willing to get into the farming of it is going down.
Interesting. Okay, so the first issue is time.
Yeah.
The second issue is labour. What's the third issue?
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the two-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
Climate change. So over the past few years, key matcha farming regions in Japan, Kyoto is a main centre for matcha, have endured some really serious droughts. Now, according to media reports, some farmers have lost between 20 to 30% of their matcha harvest because of extreme heat.
Wow, interesting. I feel like that's a conversation, this intersection between climate change and farming or agriculture and other products.
Yeah.
That's a topic of conversation that has come up many times before on this podcast.
Yeah, and take coffee, for example. So prices of coffee beans are up as much as 78% over the past 3 years. Climate experts suggest that by 2050, up to half of all current coffee growing land may be unsuitable for production because of climate change. Then you've got chocolate, which has also had price rises of over 400% over the past 3 years. We've talked about that on TDA before, and that's primarily due to climate-induced disruptions. And even the sacred avocado isn't safe. Australian avocado production dipped 15% last year due to adverse weather conditions.
And so do those three issues, the time, the labour and the climate change, does that mean that they are not growing more matcha?
Well, they are actually growing more, but it's still not flowing into the market as quickly as the demand necessitates. So a number of Japanese farmers who had previously grown another variation of tea are switching to meet international demand. According to the Japanese Tea Production Association, the country now produces 5,500 tonnes-ish of tencha, which is unground matcha leaves, in 2024. And that's 2.7 times the production of the country in 2014.
I don't know if this is a weird question, but can other countries start growing matcha now?
It's not a weird question. I did something weird and I looked at Google Trends around this topic and can other countries grow matcha and can I grow matcha are actually two of the most common searches here. So
that could be a new Daily Aus product.
Yeah, it would take 5 years, which would be a while.
I'll see you there.
But they can grow matcha. But many argue, though, that the nuanced traditions and conditions required to grow matcha are unique to Japan. A lot of people say that when you have matcha that's grown in another country, it tastes different. So it's to do with the soil and the conditions and the methods with which it's farmed. China is actually the largest exporter of matcha in the world. So it is in other places. And it does have an impact on the price. It's cheaper to grow it outside of Japan. There was an article that interviewed the head of matcha.com, a great URL to have secured. And he said what makes Japanese matcha great is 800 years of expertise, the ideal geological environmental growing conditions, and perfection of the equipment and process. And he went on to say there are regions of China that are attempting to produce matcha. However, they lack the expertise, equipment, soil conditions, and the right tea plant cultivators. So the conditions with which great matcha is grown.
So what does this mean for people who love their daily matcha? Matcha is now starting to sound weird to me, but let's keep going with it. What does it mean for people who love it, people who want to drink it every day? Will the price of it just keep going up?
I think if you actually sit down and look at those 3 factors that we've identified, there's no world in which matcha gets cheaper. I mean, from the very existential of climate change all the way down to the 5-year delay of planting new crops, every indicator kind of suggests that I wouldn't be surprised if this time next year we're looking at a $10 matcha in Australian cafes. If global demand stays at that level, at that price, it becomes even more of a lucrative industry though. So I don't see a world where your matcha gets cheaper. I think we might see more people brewing their own matcha at home. You can buy it in powdered form and not pay for the labor of cafes. That might be a way.
You have it with you. You brought a prop into the pod studio.
So I took this from the kitchen of our co-workers. It's ceremonial grade matcha, and it's an interesting way to describe it there, but it definitely says product of Japan. So this is straight from the source, and maybe it's a cheaper way to sustain a matcha addiction is to start making it at home.
That would have been a better experience for anyone watching on YouTube versus listening. I'm not sure how that audio experience was.
Which you can do. You can watch us now on YouTube.
You can watch us on YouTube.
Follow
now.
our channel and
we
get
do
behind
it. Every day.
It helps us sustain our matcha purchases in the office.
Well, Sam, thank you for spending your day going deep on matcha and the economics of matcha. Our matcha correspondent.
Your absolute pleasure.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, enjoy your matchas.